Most people believe off-grid living starts after everything is built. Mine started when I was laid off, had no income, and I pulled on to raw land in the absolute middle of nowhere with next to nothing. This video is really about uncertainty, not the romantic kind, but the kind where you really don't know how long your money's going to last. Whether you're going to be able to make it to town, or whether you'll even be able to afford to build the structures you're trying to build. I'm going to walk through what the first 2 years actually felt like. From pulling onto raw land with almost nothing, to building shelter, water, food, power, and income on my homestead. It would seem that this is where most people get stuck. They believe that off-grid life starts after everything's built. Day one actually started with the wrong land. And, well, I was exactly where the coordinates told me to go, but the coordinates I was provided were wrong. I had never even seen my land, by the way. I bought it sight unseen, and I just used satellite images and researched to the best of my ability. So day one was actually my second day out here. And it was way out here. Just absolutely raw land. No structures. Just me and one dog and some food in a trailer with some containers for water. So the first night I pretty well just kind of relaxed, soaked it all in, camped. But pretty quickly after that, I had to just consider my entire budget. I had saved $6,000. And how was I going to spend and invest that and put it to use? And the first thing I did was built the shop, and that took about $4,000. And I had no source of income yet. I needed somewhere to store food and items safely. It all started really, I had enough stuff that I needed to store some stuff somewhere, and I just kind of shoved them into a tree to kind of protect them from the sun and rain maybe. And while it was just a shed, I was living in my camper van. The shed provided a carport, which is shade for the van, making it much more comfortable. About 10 degrees cooler in the direct sun, you know. That made it livable the first couple years without air conditioning or anything. And because I brought out containers for water and I brought out food, I then had shelter, water, and food. You know, more shelter than just the van. And you'd be surprised how motivational that was to me, to have a structure, a nice solid structure that if I had to, I could stay in there if I had to. Pretty quickly I got a kind of like a scrap material cast iron stove, and I was able to work in there, and pretty quickly I also built a shower just off of the side of the shop, and just those few things made it a lot more comfortable. When I first came out here, I had not been through an entire year. I'd only been through the summer. I showed up May 18th, I think, 2020. And it was hot and dry. And it looks like the desert out here. The high desert looks a lot like the desert, especially to someone who hasn't spent much time in the desert. It looks very dry. And it hit, I think that first year, it actually broke 100 degrees a couple times. Not for long. For a couple hours, you know. It had hit like 103 degrees or so. And I thought, man, this place is pretty brutal. I've been hotter places, but that's pretty hot. But it's super dry and not a lot of rain. I hadn't yet seen monsoon season. And that 10 degrees, by the way, made a huge difference. It made it livable to park the camper van under that carport. It provided wind blockage. you know, protection from the rain and the wind and the sun. Maybe simply getting started and rolling and building some momentum was pretty beneficial to start with. I didn't have air conditioning for at least the first 2 years. It might have been 3 years maybe before I even got air conditioning. And that made an enormous difference when I got to that point. That was a real nice upgrade that makes you can be pretty comfortable without it, but you feel a lot more at home when you can control the temperature, whether it's hotter or colder. Even with that 10-degree difference underneath the shelter, there was at least a month where you go to bed sweaty. That's just I put up, I got those nets that magnetize together to keep insects out, and I would just have the door wide open, trying to catch the cool breeze. And thankfully, the one benefit, like I say, there's a whole month where it doesn't really cool down completely at night. Outside of that, it cools down quite a bit, and that really makes it livable most of the year. It's uncomfortable for that 1 month without air conditioning. So if you can imagine, I had $6,000, spent 4 of it right out the gate, and I spent a lot more of it on, grabbing some tools, making sure I had some comforts and whatnot. It went pretty fast. And so I had to really be tight with the budget, and there were times where for over a month I couldn't even afford gas money to run to town. By the way, it's a long way to town, and it's about $50-$60 to drive to town and back in gas, and so there were long stretches, and that it makes it complicated. You might run out of certain food items or any kind of pleasure. What about having gas for heat or propane? And it really complicated it. I didn't have a safety net where I could just call Dad and he'd come help me out, or phone a friend because I needed $30. That wasn't an option in my scenario, which makes it a lot more tight. So not having that backup plan. And I love solitude. Absolutely love solitude. But there's a difference between solitude and isolation because I didn't have the finances. There was a lot that could have gone wrong in the beginning. Here's something that I had going for me. From the time I was 18, you could consider me an entrepreneur of some sort. And actually way before that. If we took it way back to being a child even, my brother and I would make little Play-Doh dinosaurs and go around the neighborhood and sell them to people. I was always thinking of something to make some kind of money. It just got more legitimate, like a business, by the time I was around 18. And on and off my whole life I've done something like that. So I already knew what I was going to do maybe a month or 2 before I came out here. And I actually started talking about it. I already had the camper van. I was building the camper van. I started documenting it and building some sort of presence online because I knew that it'd help me eventually build my business. I had already named, I already came up with the name, Frugal Off Grid. I had the plan. So after I came out here, I needed some products. And in my experience, having products you actually care about, maybe something you're passionate about, helps. It's authentic. And I was already interested in improving my health. And so I was drinking different herbal tea blends for benefits. And I started to sell blue tea, red tea, green tea. I started to do corn flour because I thought, hey, I could grow corn here and then make my own bread. And that was what kind of started the corn flour thing. And I make it chunky and original, It's not, when you buy this corn flour at the store, it's not like mine. And so, it's unique. It's something I like and really use. And I had no money left the day I started the business, guys. And I did legitimately start the business, forming an LLC, articles organization, banking account tied to it, taxes, all that stuff. and I had no money. When I opened it, because I had to spend money to start the business, I had no money the day that I decided to basically launch and say, hey guys, I got a business, go buy stuff. And slowly but surely, I made a little bit of money that first week. I made a little bit of profit. And I think that first week I was able to drive to town and get some supplies I really badly needed. Like, not much, but but something. And then I made it a little more, and it started to go a little bit. And I was really careful with the budget, reinvesting almost everything back into the business, and started to make a little bit of leeway. I can't say that I wrote a business plan for this situation, which is actually kind of interesting because I had already previously written business plans, and I should have, and you should too. That's a good idea. I didn't do that, and maybe I had it in my mind, a lot of it, because I had had some experience, but this was more of a survival situation than a business plan. Fast forward 2 years. Fast forward 2 years. I've got the shelter, which I had pretty quick out the gate. I've got some upgrades on the van. It's a little nicer. I've got another dog. The gardens are actually working and producing. Not a huge amount, maybe 50 to 100 pounds of produce that first 2 years. So, yeah, 50, maybe 50 pounds a year, something like that. Maybe 100 pounds. Mostly spaghetti squash, if you're curious. A lot of melons and stuff work just fine out here. You just have to add nutrients to the soil. And by then, I had already started with larger livestock. So I had harvested a goat by then, maybe a few goats. And then I transitioned into pigs because I prefer them. They're just easier. But at that point, though, outside of the cabin didn't exist yet. And it didn't for another couple years almost. But I had shelter, water, and food, and functionally was actually harvesting a fair amount of water, able to haul a lot of water, and growing a lot of food, being able to start to offset costs, and most importantly, not paying a mortgage this entire time. So although I wasn't flawlessly comfortable yet, I think around that time I actually redid the inside of the camper van. Some people said, don't waste your money, save it for the cabin. But I was working toward the cabin, but I needed somewhere real clean and organized and nice and neat, and somewhere I could feel maybe almost proud of, or, not ashamed of. A nice, clean, organized place to live. And that helped me. And it only cost, I paid $1,600 to make it look a lot nicer. And and that helped me. And I just put everything aside that I could. I spent what I could eventually each month to start to build the cabin. Shelter, water, food, power, and income were now working. They had worked, but it was to a point where it was like, okay, this is going to work. I'm going to be able to slowly and surely continue to increase income and build this homestead. The first 2 years are not about freedom, although you sure feel free that first night. I hit the ground running. It's more about proving to yourself that you can live with uncertainty and continue to make progress. That's probably the hardest part, and once you get past that and you've got systems in place, I think everything starts to fall together.